Harley-Davidson built its empire on tradition, then dared to break it. The V-Rod engine was powerful, fast, and nothing like the Harleys people loved. Riders mocked it, dealers dismissed it, yet today it's a cult icon. Stick around, because by the end, you'll see Harleys gamble differently. The engine that rocked Harley's world. Harley-Davidson was never supposed to build an engine like this. For over a century, the company was defined by its air-cooled 45-degree V-twin engines that shook, rumbled, and roared with an unmistakable personality. They were loud, they were simple, and they were sacred to a generation of riders who saw them as rolling symbols of American rebellion. Yet in the early 2000s, Harley stunned its loyalists and critics alike by introducing something that looked more like a machine from Stuttgart than Milwaukee. It was called the Revolution engine, and it was unlike anything Harley had dared to sell before. Developed in partnership with Porsche's engineering division, the Revolution engine was a water-cooled 60-degree V-twin with dual overhead cams and a dizzying 9,000 revolutions per minute redline. At a time when most Harleys barely pushed past 5,500, this new motor spun into territory reserved for superbikes and high-performance imports. The numbers were shocking, over 115 horsepower and acceleration that could humiliate many so-called muscle bikes. Harley was no longer selling a cruiser built for nostalgia. It was offering a street machine that could genuinely scare the Japanese competition. But this leap was not just about numbers. It was a gamble that Harley could reinvent itself for a new century, chasing younger riders who might otherwise buy a Ducati or a Yamaha. And that gamble was about to tear the Harley community down the middle. The numbers were staggering, yet what really unsettled riders was the moment they heard it come to life. When a Harley doesn't sound like one. If Harley-Davidson is famous for one thing, it is the sound. The low, loping rhythm, often described as potato-potato, is as iconic as the bar and shield logo stamped on the tank. Owners have fought in court to protect that sound as intellectual property. Crowds on main streets from Daytona to Sturgis can identify it from blocks away. The noise is a badge of belonging, which is why the V-Rod's voice felt like a betrayal. The Revolution engine did not thump, it howled. Instead of a lazy, uneven beat, it delivered a smooth, high-revving growl that echoed more like a European sport machine than an American cruiser. To purists, it was alien. For many, it was offensive. The moment a V-Rod pulled into a gathering, heads turned not in admiration, but in confusion. Some riders whispered that it sounded too clean, while others shouted directly that it was not a real Harley. That phrase became the cultural wound of the V-Rod era. To some, the badge on the tank was meaningless if the sound did not match the identity they had grown up with. It was as if Harley had sold its soul to build an imposter dressed in chrome and muscle. Yet sound was only one part of the controversy. What truly set the Revolution apart was buried deep inside its mechanics, where Harley abandoned nearly every element of its traditional engineering language. If the soundtrack divided the faithful, the engineering lurking under the chrome would ignite an even fiercer debate. If this story already hits you, hit like and drop a comment below. Did Harley go too far, or was the V-Rod misunderstood genius? Inside the Revolution. Peel back the chrome, and the Revolution engine reveals just how far Harley-Davidson stepped from its roots. Instead of the traditional 45-degree layout, this motor sat at a 60-degree angle, wider, more balanced, and designed for higher revs. Instead of push rods and 2 valves per cylinder, it used double overhead cams and 4 valves, the kind of architecture riders expected from Japanese sport bikes rather than American cruisers. Instead of cooling fins meant to dissipate air, the V-Rod carried a radiator, water pump, and hoses, all the plumbing of modern engineering that Harley fans had long mocked in other brands. The fingerprints of Porsche engineers were everywhere. Harley had originally developed a racing prototype called the VR1000 in the 1990s, a machine that never reached commercial glory but laid the foundation for something new. Porsche helped refine that DNA into a street-ready engine that could pass emissions tests, withstand daily abuse, and deliver power curves unheard of in Harley's lineup. A plain-bearing crankshaft replaced the roller designs of the past. Gear-driven cams replaced chain slop. A counterbalancer tamed vibrations so the bike could scream toward 9,000 without rattling itself to pieces. In short, it was a masterpiece of precision, a Harley built with German discipline. But inside that brilliance was the seed of the conflict. Because every part of this engine shouted performance, it forced riders to ask whether performance was really what Harley should stand for. The technical genius was undeniable. Yet in the real world, genius mattered less than culture, and culture was about to erupt. We've prepared a rider's essentials list, gear and accessories that make long trips smoother, safer, and way more fun. See what we recommend in the description below. Muscle cruiser or culture war? The V-Rod was more than an engineering experiment. It was a declaration of war against the conventions of Harley-Davidson. On paper, it belonged to a new category that critics quickly labeled the muscle cruiser. With over 115 horsepower on tap, a 4-second sprint to 60 miles per hour, and top speeds reaching well past 130, it could compete head-to-head with Yamaha's V-Max or Ducati's Diavel. It was fast enough to embarrass baggers on the highway, and stylish enough to lure younger riders who wanted the Harley name without the old man image. But Harley's core audience did not buy motorcycles on paper. They bought them on identity. And here, the V-Rod stumbled into hostile territory. Traditional riders looked at the hydroformed frame, the exposed radiator, and the sleek bodywork, and they did not see Milwaukee steel. They saw a foreign invader. To them, the V-Rod represented a cultural split. On one side were riders who valued tradition, sound, and heritage. On the other side were new adopters who wanted power, speed, and something modern. The V-Rod was supposed to bridge those worlds, but instead it carved a trench between them. In chasing new customers, Harley had accidentally triggered a culture war within its own ranks. And as we will see, that war did not end on showroom floors. It spilled out onto rally grounds, into dealerships, and even onto the open highway, where insults flew as freely as exhaust fumes. The Revolution engine was no longer just a machine. It was a lightning rod, and the storm that followed came from Harley's own people. Dealer dismissals. The first wounds for many V-Rod owners did not come from rival riders, but from the very dealerships that sold them the bike. Walk into a Harley-Davidson showroom in the mid-2000s, and you could find yourself treated like an outsider simply for choosing the liquid-cooled machine over a Road King or a Street Glide. One of the most infamous stories came from riders who brought their new V-Rod in for its first oil change. The service desk clerk, after hearing the model name, would pause, look down, and mutter a sarcastic apology as if the owner had made a mistake rather than a proud purchase. This dismissive attitude was not isolated. Across the country, buyers reported similar interactions. Instead of being congratulated for owning one of Harley's boldest engineering projects, they were sometimes told they would upgrade later to a real bike. The implication was clear. The V-Rod was not part of the family. For a company that marketed itself on community and brotherhood, this sort of treatment stung deeply. Newcomers expecting to be welcomed into a tribe found themselves standing at its edges. Dealers had their own reasons for the cold shoulder. The V-Rod did not sell accessories at the same rate as baggers, and its owners often represented a younger, less traditional crowd. But to the customers who spent real money on the bike, the rejection was personal. It was as if they had bought their way into the clubhouse only to find the door slammed in their face. That sense of exclusion did not end at the dealership counter. It roared even louder in the parking lots of America's rallies. Riders in rebellion. Nowhere did the V-Rod's outsider status become more visible than at rallies. Across America, from Milwaukee to Sturgis, owners rode proudly into gatherings only to be greeted with smirks, jokes, and occasionally outright insults. At one event, a woman leaned out of a truck window and screamed at a demo rider that his motorcycle was not a Harley. despite the name painted clearly on the tank. She did not even own a Harley herself, but the cultural code was so strong that even onlookers felt licensed to enforce it. For V-Rod riders, these moments were both infuriating and clarifying. The bike drew attention everywhere, and attention meant confrontation. Some took pride in standing apart, answering heckles with the twist of the throttle and letting the bike's acceleration do the talking. Others felt weighed down by the constant suspicion, as if every ride to a group event came with a test of legitimacy. Pride mixed with shame in equal measure. The division ran deeper than playful ribbing. Riders who had migrated from sport bikes felt comfortable on the V-Rod, but found themselves alienated by the bagger-heavy Harley culture. Meanwhile, longtime Harley owners who added a V-Rod to their garage sometimes hid their affection, reluctant to admit they enjoyed a machine that many dismissed as foreign. These tensions turned rallies into battlegrounds, with laughter on one side and resentment on the other. At the heart of those battles was something deeper than appearances: the clash of sound itself, the sound of division. The exhaust note became the sharpest dividing line between V-Rod riders and traditional Harley loyalists. For decades, the Harley sound was a low, loping rumble that resonated like a tribal drum. It was the anthem of freedom on American highways. Then came the V-Rod, whose liquid-cooled heart produced a different kind of music, a rapid-fire growl that climbed smoothly toward the red line. To the uninitiated, it was thrilling, but to the faithful, it was sacrilege. At group rides, the difference was obvious. Rows of baggers thundered in harmony while a lone V-Rod sliced through with its high-pitched snarl. Instead of blending into the symphony, it sounded like an interruption. Riders on traditional bikes used that difference as a line of status. To own the right sound was to own the right identity. To have the wrong sound was to invite mockery. In conversations at roadside stops, bagger riders would nod in solidarity, swapping tales of their machines. But when a V-Rod owner joined the circle, the atmosphere changed. Jokes about hair dryers or sewing machines floated through the air. The message was unmissable. This bike might wear the Harley badge, but it did not sing the Harley song. Owners learned quickly that in the culture of sound, they were second-class citizens. Yet from that outsider status, a new brotherhood began to rise, one that embraced the very differences others despised. The cult following. What started as ridicule slowly transformed into pride for those who stuck with the V-Rod. While the mainstream Harley world might sneer, an underground community began to thrive. Riders who valued performance over tradition found kinship in one another. Online forums, social media groups, and meetups started to gather the faithful. They did not need the approval of bagger riders. They had each other. The Night Rod Special became the centerpiece of this cult following. Its blacked-out styling and aggressive stance appealed to younger riders who wanted something sinister and fast. For them, the Revolution engine's howl was not a flaw, but a badge of rebellion. They leaned into the difference, revving high at rallies to announce that they were not pretending to be traditionalists. They were charting a new path. This following stretched beyond America. In Europe and Asia, where riders were more accustomed to high-performance engines, the V-Rod fit naturally into the scene. International fans embraced it not as a broken Harley, but as the Harley that finally spoke their language. The cult following gave the model a staying power that no amount of ridicule could erase. Within its ranks, owners found the brotherhood that the dealerships and rallies had denied them. While loyalty flourished on the streets, the boardroom was running out of patience, and the real reckoning shifted to Harley's balance sheets. Harley's big bet. When Harley-Davidson unveiled the V-Rod in the early 2000s, it was more than a new motorcycle. It was a declaration that the company intended to evolve beyond its past. The traditional air-cooled cruisers that built the brand were still selling, but Harley executives could see the storm clouds forming. Japanese and European manufacturers were winning younger riders with aggressive styling and high-performance engineering. Globalization was eroding the luxury of staying insular. To compete in markets from Tokyo to Berlin, Harley had to do something it had never done before. The answer was the Revolution engine, built in partnership with Porsche. This collaboration was a gamble not only because it introduced liquid cooling and high-revving performance, but also because it tied Harley's brand to a European design house. For some, this was genius. Porsche engineering added credibility with riders who might never have looked twice at a Harley. For others, it was blasphemy, a sign that the company was outsourcing its soul. Yet Harley's leadership believed that without a radical break, the brand risked fading into irrelevance. The V-Rod was the spearhead of this gamble. It was meant to lure the next generation, riders who valued speed, modern aesthetics, and international cachet. Harley was betting its future on a motorcycle that looked and sounded nothing like its past. The ambition was bold, but ambition is only as strong as the sales figures that follow. The numbers game. On launch, the V-Rod carried a price tag higher than many expected. Positioned above the Sportster line but below premium baggers, it aimed at riders who might otherwise buy a Yamaha VMAX or a Ducati Monster. Harley projected strong sales in the United States and saw even bigger opportunities overseas, where sport bike culture was stronger and younger demographics were willing to pay for performance. At first, curiosity drove respectable sales. The novelty of a Porsche-tuned Harley caught attention in Europe, and in certain Asian markets the modern styling resonated. But in the United States, the company's financial bedrock, the reception was lukewarm. Traditional buyers hesitated, and younger riders balked at the price compared to Japanese alternatives that delivered similar or greater horsepower for less. By the late 2000s, the sales trajectory was clear. The V-Rod was not a total failure, but it was nowhere near the breakout hit Harley needed. Market share barely budged. The model found small pockets of loyalists, yet it never dominated its segment. Even in Europe, where it performed better, it could not shake the perception of being an odd hybrid. Too different for purists, and too expensive for performance hunters. The numbers did not lie. Harley's bold experiment was turning into a financial drag. As the spreadsheets told one story, Harley's leadership confronted another. A battle for the company's very identity. The brand split. Inside Harley-Davidson's headquarters, the V-Rod sparked a philosophical war. Executives were divided between those who saw it as the path forward and those who believed it was eroding the company's greatest asset, its identity. For over 100 years, Harley had sold not just motorcycles, but a lifestyle rooted in American tradition. The chrome-heavy, air-cooled V-twins represented rebellion and freedom in a uniquely domestic style. Could a sleek, water-cooled cruiser designed with European engineers really carry that torch? Supporters argued that the V-Rod was essential to compete globally. They pointed out that young riders were not seduced by nostalgia. They wanted power, technology, and a modern image. Critics countered that chasing new markets by alienating loyalists was suicidal. They feared the V-Rod diluted Harley's brand equity, turning it into just another manufacturer rather than a cultural icon. This split mirrored the larger tension inside the motorcycle world. Should Harley remain the guardian of tradition, or should it embrace innovation at the risk of losing itself? Every quarter brought new debates, and every sluggish sales report tilted the balance toward retreat. The arguments could not go on forever. The day came when Harley chose to shut the experiment down. End of the line. After 15 years on the market, the V-Rod was discontinued in 2017. Officially, Harley framed the decision as a strategic refocus on its core touring and cruiser lines. Behind the scenes, the reasons were more complex. The Revolution engine was expensive to build, requiring manufacturing processes unlike the rest of Harley's lineup. Its unique parts and tooling drove up costs in a company that thrived on economies of scale. Sales had plateaued years earlier, leaving the model unable to justify the expense. More importantly, the company was under pressure to invest in new directions: electric motorcycles, refreshed baggers, and international expansion. In that context, the V-Rod was no longer a bold experiment. It was a costly distraction. For owners, the news landed like a betrayal. For critics, it was validation that Harley had strayed too far. But for Harley-Davidson itself, it was a sober recognition of reality. The gamble had not paid off as hoped. The bike had won admirers, but not enough of them to alter the company's trajectory. Yet endings have a way of creating legacies, and the V-Rod's story was far from finished. The collector's bike. When Harley-Davidson pulled the plug on the V-Rod in 2017, many assumed it would fade quietly into history. Instead, the opposite happened. Almost immediately, the model began to climb in value on the used market. What had once been dismissed as an oddball became a prized possession. Riders who once sneered at its radiator and high-revving motor began to acknowledge its rarity, and collectors sensed opportunity. The Night Rod Special, with its sinister blacked-out styling, quickly became the crown jewel of the lineup. The V-Rod Muscle, with its wide stance and aggressive exhausts, also found a second life as a symbol of raw power. Prices that once dipped close to bargain territory began to creep upward, sometimes fetching more than the original sticker. In certain regions, particularly in Europe, used models sold faster than they had when new. Scarcity was doing what brand loyalty never could, turning the V-Rod into a coveted machine. This reversal revealed a deeper truth about motorcycles. What is mocked in one era may be celebrated in the next. By breaking from tradition, the V-Rod carved out a uniqueness that time transformed into value. It was no longer a question of whether it was a real Harley. It had become a Harley you could no longer buy new, and that made it special. While collectors prized its scarcity, rivals were already drawing lessons from Harley's risky adventure. The competitor's advantage. The V-Rod's bold experiment did not go unnoticed by rival manufacturers. Japanese and European brands watched carefully as Harley tried to enter their territory. Companies like Yamaha, Ducati, and Suzuki saw the V-Rod not as a threat, but as validation that the performance cruiser segment mattered. Yamaha doubled down on the V-Max, Ducati sharpened its Diavel, and Suzuki refined its Boulevard series. Each offered high horsepower, aggressive styling, and in some cases, lower prices than Harley's exotic machine. For these competitors, Harley's struggle provided a roadmap of what not to do. They realized that while engineering innovation could attract attention, cultural fit mattered just as much. Ducati's Diavel, for instance, was unapologetically Italian in design and execution. It never tried to be something else. Yamaha's V-Max leaned into its heritage of brute force without pretending to channel cruiser nostalgia. Harley, in contrast, tried to graft modern engineering onto a brand built on tradition, and the seams showed. The rivals benefited from Harley's misstep by claiming the high-performance cruiser market more fully. Riders who might have considered the V-Rod but hesitated at its identity crisis often went straight to these alternatives. In effect, Harley proved the demand existed, but others harvested the reward. That shift in market power was only part of the picture. The V-Rod also exposed a far bigger tension between tradition and globalization. The political economy of change. The V-Rod was more than a motorcycle. It was a case study in the politics of globalization. For decades, Harley had been a symbol of American steel, assembled in Midwestern factories and celebrated as part of national identity. By partnering with Porsche in Germany to develop its most radical engine, Harley inadvertently raised uncomfortable questions about what it meant to be American-made. To some riders, this partnership was practical. Why not borrow expertise to push the brand forward? To others, it was proof that Harley was selling out. In an era when manufacturing jobs were disappearing across the United States, the optics of outsourcing design to Europe stung. The V-Rod was not simply a motorcycle with a radiator. It was a reminder that American companies were deeply entangled in global supply chains, whether riders liked it or not. This tension reflected a broader economic shift. Harley wanted to compete on the world stage, but doing so meant breaking away from the myth of purely domestic craftsmanship. The Revolution engine symbolized this collision of tradition and global reality. In the end, the controversy was never just about horsepower or styling. It was about what Harley represented in an age when identity, industry, and nationalism were colliding. While executives debated symbols of nationhood, riders on the ground were forging their own answer to what Harley truly meant. Before you go, subscribe now. More stories like this are coming, and missing them means missing the secrets Harley and the industry never wanted you to hear. The Rider's Revenge. Despite the backlash, the sneers, and even the corporate decision to discontinue it, the V-Rod left behind a passionate rider base that refused to vanish. Across online forums, social media, and international clubs, V-Rod owners built their own community, one that prided itself on difference rather than conformity. They did not need the potato soundtrack to prove their identity. Their proof was speed, styling, and the thrill of a bike that could out-rev nearly anything else wearing the Harley badge. This underground identity became its own kind of rebellion. In rejecting the gatekeeping of traditional Harley culture, V-Rod riders embodied the very spirit of defiance that the company had always marketed. They were not outsiders. They were carrying forward the idea that Harley was about breaking rules. Ironically, the riders of the machine, once branded as not a real Harley, ended up expressing Harley's core philosophy more authentically than many of its critics. Today, the V-Rod lives on in that paradox. It is both a cautionary tale for Harley's boardroom and a badge of honor for its community. It failed to save the company's future, but succeeded in proving that rebellion has many forms. The legacy of the V-Rod is not simply that it broke from tradition, it is that it forced everyone, from executives to riders, to ask what Harley-Davidson really means. And so the story ends not with silence, but with an echo, the howl of an engine that still defies definition. The V-Rod story proves one thing: Harley's biggest risks still echo today. If you've watched this far, don't stop here. Subscribe now and join this community, because the next video will uncover even more hidden truths about the machines shaping our future. Miss it, and you'll miss history being rewritten.